A warm welcome to all of you for the first panel discussion today, SEL and Inclusion, a Systemic Lens. I'm Seema, and I will be the moderator for this panel.
Hello, please start the video.
Are you able to start the video for Madhu? Can somebody help?
Yes, it started.
Okay, thank you. I'm Seema, and I'll be your moderator for this panel today. I'd like to begin by giving a video description. I'm a woman with straight hair, dark hair, and I'm wearing a blue top against a white background today. A little bit about myself. I'm a researcher and an educator and trainer with a background in developmental psychology and education. I have been working in the field of education for the past 10 years, and I have a PhD in education from the University of Cambridge with a specialization in inclusive education. Currently, I work with the School Outreach Services team at Umeed, and my work lies at the intersection of inclusion, socio-emotional well-being, and mental health. For today's panel discussion, SEL and Inclusion, a Systemic Lens, we will endeavor to unpack how SEL and inclusion are defined at the systems level and why we see these concepts working together. It will further examine how they appear in practice. This panel will endeavor to critically examine what SEL and inclusion in diverse educational settings look like. While inclusion in the education system has been incorporated within the Right to Education Act and has also found and SEL has found prominent mention in the National Education Policy of 2022. This panel will explore how at the systems level, both these concepts are understood by policymakers, education officials, school head teachers, and the community. And the panel will help us think about the interconnectedness between inclusion and SEL. Finally, this panel will explore what does the intersection of SEL and inclusion look like in practice in diverse educational settings, and where or when does this panel think SEL and inclusion will become an integral part, or if it is already an integral part of our educational system today. And without much ado, I'm delighted to introduce the panelists for today. We have with us Dr. Ankur Madan, who is the professor and director, School of Education at the Azim Premji University. She teaches courses in child development and inclusive education in the Masters of Education program. She also anchors diploma programs in early childhood education, inclusive education, and learning disability for working professionals. Her research interests and publications are in the childhood studies and in India and inclusive education. She has been interested in interrogating the conceptions of inclusion and inclusive education from the practitioner's perspective, situated within the Indian context. We are also very happy to have with us Sanket Gala, who is a 21-year-old person with disability having muscular dystrophy, and he is completely on wheelchair. He has completed his Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, and currently he's pursuing first year of Masters in Applied Psychology from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Sanket has been a co-author of Jugaad and a National Young Persons Action Team member at Yuva, India, and UNICEF Initiative. Sanket is also a disability rights self-advocate. We are also very happy to welcome Shishi Joshi, who is a co-founder and chief executive of the award-winning not-for-profit Project Mumbai. At a rough estimate, Project Mumbai has impacted over 10 million lives across various sectors, including healthcare, specifically mental health, environment, governance, education, and volunteerism. As a model of public-private partnership, the Project Mumbai is constantly looking for opportunities in social transformation through initiatives of large scale, among the most recent being an effort to make Mumbai accessible, having adopted the wheelchair basketball team. a recipient of 16 awards, including the United Nations SDG Solitary Action Award 2020. Project Mumbai is a little over 3 years old.
Ma'am, a little slow, though I can read it, but you are too fast and your screen also moves too fast.
Sorry, I will be a little slower. And finally, we have with us Vishal Tilreja, who is the co-founder of Dream a Dream, which is a charitable trust empowering children and young people from vulnerable backgrounds to overcome adversity and flourish in the 21st century using a creative life skills approach. Vishal is an Ashoka Fellow, an Eisenhower Fellow, and a board member at PYE Global and Gunj. He has previously been a founder director of Unlimited India and board member of India Cares Foundation. Vishal believes that if we can reimagine learning to develop empathy, creative thinking, problem solving, and collaborative working skills amongst young people, they will be able to overcome adversity and flourish in a fast changing world. A very, very warm welcome to all of you and looking forward to learn from your collective wisdom. To begin this panel, I would like to invite the panelists to share their reflections and thoughts on a few questions that we had already posed. For example, how do we define and make sense of SEL and inclusion at a systems level, be it at schools, district level, or government policy level? And do we see SEL and inclusion working together? If yes, why do we see these as working together? And finally, have you experienced or seen SEL and inclusion in practice? And how do they appear to you in practice? Today, I would like to invite Dr. Ankur Madan to share her reflections, followed by Sanket Gala, Sishi Joshi, and finally Vishal Talreja. So Ankur, I invite you to share your reflections today. Thank you.
Thank you, Seema, for inviting me. Hello, everyone. I'm Ankur. I'm a 52-year-old woman. I have short hair, which is mostly gray and brown. I'm wearing spectacles, a bindi, and a sari, which is beige and brown in color, and a maroon blouse. My background is mostly white. I will be approaching this topic for a discussion today by taking mostly a systemic view of a school as an organization. And I'll be making a few opening comments, but I'll restrict them to being very, very brief, and we can elaborate as we go along if required. When a school makes a conscious effort towards embracing inclusion, it requires a system level change, a shift in the mindset of the organization, so to speak, by embracing an ideology, a culture of cooperation and collaboration, which leads to several changes at the organization level, which can include changes at the level of infrastructure, policy, setting up of many, many subsystems and processes, hiring of specialists, training those personnel, sensitization, etc., etc. But what we should not forget is that schools are also living dynamic organizations with lives and minds of their own, I would believe. What also happens is that there may be guidelines and recommendations and do's and don'ts that we often feel that schools can follow to become inclusive. We believe that schools should be like this, or inclusive schools should be like this, or should not be like this. But there is really no prototype or a blueprint that is available for an inclusive school. And from my experience of having seen some such settings, I also agree that there shouldn't be, which means what I'm saying here is essentially that there are no typical characteristics of an inclusive school, and rightly so. I believe that that is the case. And here I'm just building a context to what I want to say and how I believe inclusion is interconnected with the idea of social emotional learning. Now, this is largely because every school, when it embraces inclusion, lends its own unique traits and characteristics to it, which is driven by its socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage, by the socio-historic, geographic context that it belongs to, the motivations, and most importantly, the people that comprise it, right? And that is also perhaps the reason, and I strongly believe in this view, that inclusion is not something that can be imposed from outside alone. It cannot be driven only by external policy impositions. It needs to generate from within the school, whether it is driven through the drive of a visionary principal or a founder or a group of teachers who decide that this is something that they need to do. But this is also where I see a very strong connection between social emotional learning and inclusion. In my experience, I have seen that an inclusive school environment can truly ensure the social emotional well-being of all its members without exception. And I believe that it does so in multiple ways. I will just provide 2-3 illustrations and then I shall stop. When a school consciously embraces inclusion, the ideological shift that it makes organically perpetuates a culture of equity, a culture of empathy, tolerance, sensitivity, and cooperation among all its members, because without which inclusion ideologically cannot be embraced by an institution. It also creates a safe and secure environment for all the members, based on a culture of cooperation and collaboration, where each member is valued for the strengths and the roles that they perform and make a meaningful contribution towards creating the environment that is inclusive in nature. Now, it is widely recognized in inclusive education literature, and one has seen that from one's own experience, that inclusive school environments are always built on models of collaboration and partnership, strong partnership and cooperation. They cannot exist in isolation. Hence, working with one another, seeking opinion of each other, and recognizing what each individual brings to the table is extremely important to create an inclusive environment. Hence, such a culture perpetuates healthy relationships, friendships, initiates mature conversations, seeks conflict resolution through dialogue and deliberation rather than confrontation and power assertion. Right? Every person's opinion is valued and each person is given its due credit. Inside the classroom, more importantly than anything else, where a teacher makes certain reasonable accommodations to enable all the children in the class to learn effectively, listens more empathetically to each child, pays attention to the learning needs, such a teacher is not only setting a good example or being an ideal kind of role model. I think more than that, in such a classroom, each child is being provided with the freedom and the dignity to evolve without inhibition or self-doubt, to flourish and reach their potential. If such an environment is not supporting social emotional learning, then what is? Hence, I truly believe in this interconnectedness and close linkages between inclusion and social emotional learning. Thanks, Seema. This is what I wanted to say right at this time.
Thank you so much, Ankur, for sharing your thoughts and also zooming into the classroom to think about what exactly inclusion looks like and how social-emotional learning also facilitates that growth in the environment or the mindset, as you said, in terms of thinking about inclusion. With that, I would like to invite Sanket to share his thoughts and reflections on this topic of how inclusion and SEL intersect.
Hello, I am Sanket Kala. I am a 21-year-old male. I have black hair. I am wearing specs and headphones. I am wearing an orange t-shirt along with a number 8 on my right hand sleeves. Um, so Today I am going to view social emotional learning as well as inclusion from my experience as well as perspective of a person with disability. Um, and I would take into consideration my experiences from school as well as my previous college. So what I think about inclusion first is that inclusion is not um, is something where the people in the system or the people in the place accept you first of all, accept who you are, and they don't want you to change, um, and they accept as you are. uh, Another thing to inclusion would be that there are reasonable accommodations made for you. For example, for me being on wheelchair, I do need a slope. I do need lifts. Um, I ride slow, so I do need someone to help me with my notes. So reasonable accommodations to be made depending on the person who is there in that particular setting or that particular system of a school or a college. So there could be various people, and um, inclusion, like you could just try and improve in inclusion. There would never be a back, like uh, a step back to inclusion. The more you try to be inclusive, the better you become. So you get a person with disabilities, there are different disabilities, try to accommodate as many as you can. And with experience, you will know like which disability requires what. Um, the next thing would be about social emotional learning and how that would help in inclusion. So, what do you mean by social emotional learning? Emotional understanding of oneself, um, understanding others, empathizing. Um, Now, um, so this is from my own experience. I have had to face lot of discrimination at my college, where admissions were denied. Um, there was lack of infrastructure. There were lifts, but they were denying to repair them. At my school, there were no ramps, which were built later, of course, but lack of infrastructural facilities as well. Now, um, if if there was a good understanding of others' emotions, others what a person can go through when they don't have certain things. So for me, not having a ramp and someone picking me up, picking my wheelchair on steps is very stressful. So if people in the system do have that understanding, do have um, um, that amount of empathy, there would be a lot of inclusion immediately. I have seen people who immediately come to help um, when you don't need to have this. You'll just come and ask like, um, do you need some help? I got friends who would understand that I cannot travel, and if I had to travel along with someone. It's like maybe my mom, my dad. So they don't ever ask to like go somewhere out. They would instead come at my home, and we would hang out at my home. So my understanding of inclusion and empathy together is that um, if there is inclusion, there also needs to be social emotional learning, and social emotional learning at all levels. So like be it students, be it school staff, be it teachers, be it principal, be it the management, because all of them play an important role. Students, they could be a great support to the person who is belonging to a minority community or who is facing some issues. There are, so like currently I'm studying at this, and there are buddy systems there which help, or which are great support at times. And even like when I was in school, even if there was infrastructure barriers, the teachers were very inclusive. They used to help me complete my notes. They used to give me extra time for completing my notes. Um, at times it was even fine if I couldn't complete my homework on time. And they were very empathetic in terms that they used to try and understand what are my issues, not only mine, even others. They used to be extra lectures for um, people who are having learning disabilities, or people who are slow learners. The teachers in 9th and 10th used to sit extra time. They used to teach in a different way. Even if during the lectures they might not be able to do that, but they used to put extra efforts in that, and there was no extra fees charged for that. So I do feel that if both of these come together, it will just lead to a better system um, at the end of the day. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanket, and for also reinforcing what inclusion alongside reasonable accommodations actually mean, and how empathy and inclusion go hand in hand. And it needs to extend not just to fellow students, but even to teachers and principals and school management or uh, educationists within the system. With that, Sishir, I would like to invite you to share your reflections on this.
Thank you, Seema, and very interesting to hear from Dr. Ankur and Sanket as well. And I'm looking forward to listening to Vishal. I am Shishir Joshi, and I am wearing a dark blue T-shirt. I am graying in my beard, and I'm wearing round glasses. Um, and I have a white background. I have a educational experience in law, which is what I've studied. I've done my journalism, and a better part of my working life I've spent as a working journalist. And over the last 10 years, I have been in the social transformation space. Significantly, uh, the emotional learning space or the mental health space has been an area of great personal interest. And on behalf of Project Mumbai, we've been working hard, specifically in the adolescent education and mental health space. We strongly believe that when the government of India is speaking about creating a fit India movement, it's important that the government focuses more on the emotionally fit India movement rather than just focusing on a fit India. Having said that, I'd like to take this conversation forward, having heard Dr. Ankur and Sanket, and a couple of points that I picked out was when we talk about SEL, one, it has to be a multi-stakeholder kind of a participation. And in this, what we forget is the role of parents. Educational institutions play a very important role in creating infrastructure. I agree. There are students which form the base of the need, but we most often forget what parents are going through. That's one part. Second is, so it's a combination between the school, the parent, and the child, which needs to be seen in a wholesome manner. While the inclusive and emotional learning, we've heard a couple of words of infrastructure support, maybe yes, and I felt comfortable when Sanket, you mentioned in a couple of occasions and in a couple of places you were not. But is only comfort what an institution should be providing? That's one part that I'd like to stress on. Infrastructure processes are important, but can institutions go beyond becoming just daycare centers and beyond, is what I would personally feel. There is a huge gap. Dr. Ankur, you did mention the need for prototypes, and maybe the inclusive schools, or which are hoping to be inclusive schools, can learn a lot from special schools, which have created a certain amount of atmosphere in accepting children across different forms of disabilities and challenges, and learn from them to see what, as one says, the different schools are, and then imbibe some of these things. Where I feel the change still needs to take place is from being a school which makes children just comfortable and becoming a daycare, to going beyond and looking at the future of the children as well. I'm taking a child, and I know that between this year and the next year, the child feels comfortable, and so the parent feels comfortable. Can we spare a little more thought from the school's point of view, that what are parents of such children going through? How can we work with the parents to look at the child from creating milestones for the child between year 1 and year 2? Are we meeting those milestones in that sense? And then working with the parents again to see how they feel, that whether they've seen the change in the child. Currently, parents are more than happy with whatever little they get. It's also because they have their own challenges that they are coping with. And in that space, they are not in a position to ask for more. But if there is a more proactive approach that gets taken from the schools, involving parents in trying to understand what the child is going through, understanding what the parents are going through, and then while we create a development program which enhances the inclusivity of the school's focus, can we also then look at a third angle of building support groups within parents to ensure that the learning process becomes complete and the schools start learning and trying to create an atmosphere which is far, far more enriching from a child's point of view. So I feel, as I sum up, that while schools, to a certain extent, it's relatively easy for them because it is about creating infrastructure, which could mean teaching, which could mean facilities, which could mean mindsets, but it's equally challenging and important, and thus critical for them to involve parents and the role of every child in what can be a slightly more futuristic approach in this entire process. Thank you.
Thank you, Shishir, for expanding the stakeholders to parents as well. We will have a little bit more discussion, intra-panel discussion, but before that, I would invite Vishal to share his reflections on this topic today.
Thank you, Seema. Hello, everyone. My name is Vishal. I'm 44 years old. I have salt and pepper hair. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm in my work from home office. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's interesting that we had Dr. Ankur talk about school as a system, and then we had Sanket bring in his own personal experience of inclusion and challenges he faced, and also support systems he had, so at a very personal level. And then we have Shishir bring in parents as a key stakeholder. To expand that, if I look at a broader systemic level, over the last 2 decades, we have had laws enacted which ensure that every child has access to education, irrespective of the backgrounds that they come from. And this is a great law, the right to education law, the right of persons with disabilities. These are all very well framed laws. And what these laws have ensured is that there is an intention for inclusion. However, where these laws have fallen short is being able to convert that intention into the what and how of inclusion. If I take the education ecosystem itself, India has done very well in ensuring today 99% of the kids enter school at the primary level. How do we understand who are these kids entering the school system? They are first generation schoolgoers, first generation learners, a majority of them, which means that they come from some kind of vulnerability. It could be a socioeconomic vulnerability, or it could be other kinds of vulnerability. Now, when children in the first 5 to 10 years of their life experience any kind of adverse circumstances, could be lack of food or nutrition, neglect, lack of emotional love and care, in extreme cases, living in extreme poverty, being abandoned, orphaned, exposed to violence, abuse. This impacts children's ability to achieve developmental milestones. These could be physical milestones like height and weight. These could also be mental and emotional milestones about how one understands emotions, responds to emotions, adapts to emotions, engages with another human being. Now, when children miss these developmental milestones because of adversity, what we call in medical terms is failure to thrive or stunting. Now, typically, traditionally, you see stunting is only referred to as physical stunting. Stunting could also mean that I as a child have also not fully grown with my emotional and mental faculties. A majority of these children growing up in adversity, missing out on their developmental milestones, are then entering a school system at the age of 3 and 4. Without the necessary skills and capacities to engage with learning. An example of this could be how do we learn to pay attention and concentrate? Our first experience of paying attention happens when we as an infant sit on our parents' lap or a grandparents' lap and they share a story with us. They tell us a story. That's when the brain is learning to build association, learning to pay attention. It might start with being able to pay attention for 3 minutes, move on to 5 minutes, and 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But children who come from marginalized backgrounds might not have had that experience because either both parents are out working, they're too stressed, they don't have the support systems. So they've not built the ability to pay attention. And now they're put into a classroom environment where they're expected to listen to this new strange adult, which is the teacher, for 35 to 40 minutes for 4 to 5 hours a day. Now, that's when they start first experiencing exclusion. Because the education system, the design of education is not designed for them. It is designed as a one-size-fits-all. Inclusion does not just mean that every child who needs to get education has access to education. It also means what kind of access to education. How are we designing an education system that responds to the unique requirements of a child? Every child also does not start at the same level. So, but today's classroom systems are designed as every child based on age starts at the same level, moves at the same pace, moves to the next grade at the same time at the same level. It does not work for a majority of the children. So in the implementation of a beautifully designed policy, you are practicing exclusion. And over a period of time, the child becomes disengaged with learning because they're frustrated, they're not able to keep up, they're not able to understand what's wrong. They feel like a failure. And at some point, they give up and disengage. And that's when you're creating the conditions of exclusion. So if you have to create inclusive learning ecosystems, we have to first understand how today we are excluding children. Right? Every time a child fails, we don't look at it as our problem as a teacher or an adult or a parent or a school leader or a policymaker, that what am I doing wrong that this child is not learning. We label the child as the failure. Now, the role that social emotional learning plays, social emotional learning is a mindset. What is that mindset? It's a mindset of creating inclusive environments. What are inclusive environments? Environments that are created on principles of trust, safety, creativity, care, empathy, being non-judgmental. So once we embrace social emotional learning as a mindset shift in the school system, not just as a new curriculum that you introduce, but it's the way we engage with learning itself. It's the way we create the relationship between the child and the teacher, between the child and the school, between the child and the parent, between the child and the larger learning ecosystem. SEL can help us create those systems. SEL is the pedagogical approach too, right? Where we fundamentally shift the relationship of the teacher as someone who delivers knowledge in a didactic instruction manner to becomes a facilitator of learning, helping each child through their own unique journeys of learning. And then we design an education system where a child could take 3 years to learn a concept or 3 months to learn a concept. And neither of them is considered a failure. And there's opportunity for each of those children to learn at their own pace and learn well. And I'll close my point with saying that this then fundamentally goes back. The intersectionality between social emotional learning and inclusion really comes when we ask the question of what is the purpose of education? If the purpose of education is to create more working bodies in an industrial system, where children are like products in a factory, in an assembly line, then and inclusion will not happen. And any kind of SEL approaches will fail. But if we redesign and reimagine the purpose of education to help every child to build the capacities to thrive. And what could thrive mean? It could mean, of course, financial independence as an adult, but also healthy relationships, access to housing, transport, access to support systems. How is this person showing up as a citizen of the country? How are they responding to challenges with the planet? How are they showing up with compassion and empathy for themselves and others? That's what creates a more thriving ecosystem. So if we shift that and make that the purpose of education, then inclusion moves from just an idea to an actual practice. And social emotional learning then supports the achievement of that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal, for actually talking about how SEL can drive inclusion and also shifting the focus from how am I teaching to how children learn, and introspecting on what are we doing to support a child in the education system and not following the age-old norms that have become kind of an essential pillar for our education today. With that, I would like to invite the audience for your to pose your questions. You can pose it on the Q&A box. And as we wait for the audience questions, I would like to request the panelists, if you have a response to based on or reflections based on what you heard from your co-panelists, because you have all created a very, very comprehensive picture of how inclusion and SEL come together, how one drives the other, and also in terms of stakeholders, like how broad is this stakeholders when we think about SEL and inclusion. Ankur, would you like to share any reflections based on what we have heard from the other panelists today?
Yeah, thanks, Seema. Wonderful to hear everyone's views. One small clarification that I wanted to give in response to what Shishir said is that when I spoke about prototypes, I actually said that there cannot be prototypes for inclusive schools. And I did not say that we need prototypes. So that's a clarification. I think my point was misunderstood. And the other was also that when I said members of an inclusive school environment, there is no way that you can ignore parents. I assume that parents are very much part of any school environment, and also that this culture of cooperation and collaboration on which inclusion rests cannot be created without parents becoming very, very important stakeholders. So that was one point that I wanted to emphasize. And I am very enamored by what Vishal just said. And I think it's very interesting that when I was thinking about this topic, I approached it from the end of thinking of creating inclusive school environments and how they perpetuate social emotional learning. And Vishal took it from the other way around. And I thought that was very interesting that he approached it by saying that if there is social emotional learning as a goal and aim of education, then inclusion happens on its own and naturally and organically. So that I thought that was very interesting, and I'm very fascinated by that. Thank you, Vishal. Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you, Ankur. Anybody else from the panelists? Yes, Shishir.
So, in fact, point taken absolutely. Well, I completely agree with you, Ankur. It wasn't a prototype. Maybe I'll rephrase that word also, that it's important to have good working models, and they should be out in the market space for others to follow, because they can't be a perfect model. Everybody, as I think you said, it's a very dynamic space that we are all working in. But can we have best practices models? Because everybody is learning, especially with the new policy mandating schools to try to become inclusive. It's almost like one box ticked approach that everybody wants to have. Can we create, and in that space, I felt special schools, by being mandated, of course, do a lot more and have specialists who are working in that space, can, as one quote unquote, the normal schools start, the buddy system within teachers, can that start off? We keep talking about student buddy systems. Can teacher to teacher buddy systems happen where a teacher who's unaware of how to cope with children who are differently able can learn from what a special trainer is looking at children from a different lens altogether, and then an empathy can be built up. And similar buddy system, which is severely lacking in the parent space. Something which I wrote about in one of the messages here is that parents often are compelled to cope in their own space and find solutions. There, the support group which I mentioned can help in the buddy space that I have. And when I meant a buddy space, can I look at, slightly digressing from the core here, but somebody who's been through it maybe 5 years earlier can share his experience that 5 years ago, my child went through this space and these challenges, and now the child is at this level and I am at this level. So for somebody who's coping with a child at an early stage, can take a learning from somebody who's already been through it and either not repeat those mistakes or find some kind of a solace from a solution that is provided by, as one says, the pro in this space from a parenting point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Shishir. We do have actually a question, which is, I think part of it you have already answered. It's directed at Ankur and Shishir. Dr. Ankur and Mr. Shishir mentioned that there needs to be a prototype. Okay, we have already established that there shouldn't be any prototype of an inclusive school. What are some changes that you think can be made or practiced from the current day to build inclusive systems? For the futuristic, are there any practices carried out in organizations?
So thank you for that question. I'll be very brief. I think that's a very, very important question to answer. and it is not a very simple response, right, that one can provide for a question of this kind. There are certain practices, there are definitely desirable, good practices that one can adopt, and many schools are also doing that. I think what is very important to understand here is that inclusion is a process. It is not something that you reach as a goal overnight. It is a very, very dynamic thing that you build on. And I would like to go back to what Sanket said when he started speaking, and he said that organizations or institutions and educational institutions, and because I'm part of one, and I was really reflecting on that and seeing it from the example of my own institution that I am part of, that institution should do what they can to begin with, and then do more and not stop there, right? There is no such perfect time or day where you think that now I'm going to run an inclusive institution. I think it's very important to begin somewhere. As long as the mindset and the ideology is there, as long as you feel that as a vision, this is the direction that I want to take, you can begin to take steps. And there are many such things. And infrastructure, in my view, is a very small but an important part of it, but it is certainly not the only one. It really requires all the stakeholders, all the members to come together, to involve members of the community, of course, parents notwithstanding, and everyone to come together to bring about the attitudinal shift, make sure that people are also going through things like skills and knowledge, are acquiring the skills and knowledge that are required to cater to needs of individual children. So recognizing, acknowledging needs, enabling those needs to be fulfilled, because at the end of the day, the education has to be a way of flourishing for each child to reach the potential that they need to. Just doing lip service to that is not adequate. So I think there are lots of practices, and we do have those guidelines. As Shishir was saying, that can we have models? Yes, we can have models, and we do. There are schools that have adopted such models. But I also want to say this last thing, and I'll stop and I'll give it to the other panelists, that, in my experience of having worked with some such schools, every school embraces its own vision of inclusion. And I think that is okay. It may not necessarily be commensurate with what the Western literature says about what inclusion should be like or what it should look like. I think it's all right. We live within the context of this huge diversity and complex education system that is there in India. And as Vishal had said, that our policies are very, very robust and are supportive of inclusion, but we are not able to execute them effectively, right? So schools do what they can. If the support system externally is not very supportive, there is very little that they can do there. So they do what they can, and as long as that model is working for them, and they have a future in mind, that this is the direction that they want to take, I think it's all right. I think it's fine. Yeah, I'll stop. I'll give it to the others.
Thank you, Ankur. Shishir, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, so just quickly taking forward, the pandemic has built a very interesting group of teachers, which is called parents. These 2 years has given parents an opportunity to spend a longer time with children who have challenges, and which has also given, I'm talking of parents who've been working parents, and this has given them an opportunity to look at different learning techniques and coping mechanisms. And restating the earlier part where we felt, while support groups is one, but that's only meant for keeping parents' interest in mind. But when the teaching curriculum model can be reworked, if parents can be included in that part of the thought process, then it will be a far more enhanced version of inclusion also. The second part is, while I restate the earlier point, it has to be a forward-looking approach, because in these 2 years of the pandemic, parents have seen their children grow. they've seen the change in the children. And then when we go back to a school which could be inclusive or special, and you see that it's not the change that they're seeing in the child, except that the child is away from a school or a home for a certain number of hours, and the change is only happening at home. That kind of a combined effort can look at setting up milestones. Thank you.
Thank you, Shishir. And thank you, Vishal, for addressing some of the Q&A on the chat. And Sanket, you have your hand raised. Could you add your thoughts?
Yeah, so just adding to what Shishir and Dr. Ankur had said, I also feel that like Dr. Ankur said that there could not be any prototype, but just to start off, what I have seen is with persons with disabilities, some of the very basic issues are with infrastructure, especially those who are with physical disabilities or locomotor disabilities. So as Vishal said that there have been very good policies around. So like recently I also learned that from my college in a course I learned that there's an audit report which is available for infrastructural checklists, and there are proper sort of instructions given as how some of the infrastructure should be, how the slopes should be built, how the ramps, how broad the lift should be, how the washrooms should be built for person with disabilities or anyone. So this could be some of the very basic things that institution can start adopting. So if they might not have that much space, they can also go and look for some ways which implement those, but are also sort of adjustable. And I think even starting with that would be a good option, and like I earlier said, they can explore more further when they get someone with a specific requirement or with specific needs. The final thing would be that they should be open to adapt things.
Thank you, Sanket, for that very pertinent point and raising about where even to begin with when we are trying to think about inclusion. Ankur, there is a question that you would like to answer. How do you bring all stakeholders to be motivated and have the same mindset and work towards the common vision of inclusion?
Yeah, so not easy, but in my experience, what I have seen is that a lot of it goes well if this vision comes from school leadership, right? So if you have people in the leadership who are invested, who believe in the vision, then it percolates down much more easily. But it is work. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of labor, but it does not mean that it cannot happen. It happens effectively when there is not just, what I was speaking about earlier, an imposition of something. So you cannot impose ideology on anyone. You cannot impose a vision on anyone. You need to negotiate. You need to dialogue. You need to make people see things from your perspective. And when that happens through a long drawn process, not just a one-off workshop once a year or a session here and there, I think when you do that continuously and also engage effectively with people, make them see how you feel about this, then it happens. It is something that is huge on time and effort investment, not so much, I think, economically, but I certainly think it's a huge investment of time and effort. But when you have leaders who are invested, they are able to do it much more effectively. Sometimes it can also happen from grounds up when there are people within the organization and it is a sort of an environment which is not so hierarchical and there are no, too many strappings that bind them. I think it is certainly possible. I've seen both kinds of organizations. Thanks.
Thank you, Ankur. I'd invite Vishal to share. I know you have been typing your responses, but if I may ask you to summarize some of what you have just shared on chat in terms of thinking about the SEL curriculum, thinking about how do we move from thinking in terms of policy all the way to practice, specifically when SEL and inclusion is concerned, and with SEL having a curriculum of its own.
Sure. Sure, Seema. In our own work with children, there have been 3-4 fundamental tenets that have helped us design SEL, work towards inclusion. One is to recognize and understand that every individual, definitely the child, has a valid desire to be seen and heard. So how do I design learning where every child can be seen and heard? Children learn best when they are in a safe and engaging environment, when they feel safe. Right? The learning experiences that come from using play and art as a medium are experiences that stay for life. If I ask everyone in the audience also, if you can tell me what do you remember of your classes back in school as a child, not many of us might remember. But if I ask you if you remember 2 or 3 experiences as a child that you had in school that has stayed with you for life, it would usually be in the sports field or in theater or debate or somewhere that you participated or a certain conversation that you had with a teacher. So it's to recognize that how does transformative experiences happen and how can we create more of those transformative experiences in the learning environment. And fourth and final tenet has been that every child deserves and needs at least one trusting adult relationship in their life. For many of us, it's either a parent or a teacher. Now, if keeping these fundamentals in mind, we then start designing a learning ecosystem, then actually the opportunities open up tremendously for us. It actually becomes much easier for us to design. Right? One of the reasons we are not creating more inclusive learning ecosystems is because we are scared that we don't know how, and we might actually do more damage. But if we actually just work around these tenets, so then the opportunities that open up is one is redesigning our current school calendar to integrate more SEL focused pedagogical approaches. Introducing SEL focused curriculums. Like for example, the Delhi government introduced the happiness curriculum in 2018, which is a very good example of an SEL focused curriculum. Third, redesigning the relationship between the child and the teacher based on these tenets. Fourth, redesigning the school environment itself, how the classroom environment is, how the school environment is, like moving away from this theater style sitting to more group sitting, creating classrooms that are flexible, movable, changeable, creating classrooms where more project-based learning can happen, inviting chaos and joy and fun in the classroom, rather than being scared of chaos. And like if I walk past a classroom today where the kids are making a lot of noise, my first thought shouldn't be that the teacher doesn't know how to take care of the children or discipline the children. My first thought should be, wow, children must be really enjoying the learning process. Right? So those are some fundamental basic shifts that then become possible if we base our learning ecosystem on these 4-5 tenets. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal. Sanket, there is a question for you in the Q&A. Could you please share a bit about your experience in school or earlier in college as to how inclusive it was other than in terms of infrastructure?
So yeah, other than infrastructure, talking about the friends I had, very inclusive. They used to wait for me. So if I had to, so in my school, my classroom was on first floor. There I had the library, I had a computer room and an AV room on the first floor as well. Later in my school years, I used to not go for my PT lectures because my weight increased and it was very difficult for someone to pick me up, take me down, bring me up. It was a bit dangerous, not only for them but also for me. So I was like, okay, like let's sacrifice it, not an issue. But even during those times, there used to be someone who used to wait with me. We used to bring chess, play chess there. They, like, while going for computer lectures or something, they used to be uh, my friends used to, like, I didn't have to tell them, they used to go bring the wheelchair. One person will go in the room, computer room, reserve a chair for me. um that I felt was very inclusive. They used to come and sit. There was a group of friends uh which we used to hang out, have tiffins during the breaks together. um uh, I also remember there was a computer teacher. So at that time I could walk a little bit. So at that time she used to um, ask the whole class to go in the computer lab, and at the end she used to help me out, going to the computer lab. So she used to come with me till the computer lab, which I felt was a good understanding of the teacher side as well. And as I told earlier, there were teachers who used help me with my notes as well. I even participated in the plays, or I used to host some programs, which the teachers were, they used to encourage me to go into competitions as well. Coming to college, so I am from arts background. So being like, it's very rare that boys go into arts. So I had a group of like 10 girls, and I am a single boy there. But they were very inclusive as well. um so like, we used to hang out together. They used to take my wheel. They learned how to drive my wheelchair. So while changing classes, they used to take me. So I do feel that in today's time there is a lot of awareness around, about how one could be empathetic, how one could learn things to help around as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Sanket, for sharing your experiences. And also, I think thank you to all you panelists for bringing in such rich perspectives on what and where the intersection of inclusion and SEL lies. Like I echo Anku's views, where she's mentioned how it is interesting to see how she approached it from an inclusive, the school as a inclusive space, and how Vishal approached as socio-emotional learning leading to inclusion, and which very nicely tells us how both of it are actually informing each other, and they're all part of the ecosystem and very important parts of the ecosystem. Because, and I believe, as you said, Vishal, in many ways it is true that the policy has shown us their intention. Like, there is intention in terms of thinking about social emotional learning, there is intention in terms of thinking about inclusion, and also a very, very intersectional view of inclusion, because inclusion is not just seen as disability inclusion, but gender, including children of different caste, class, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And as Sanket mentioned right now, like he was thinking about gender inclusion alongside a disability inclusion, even in like it. So it is an experience that is very, very intersectional for everybody. And also at the same time, all of you really reinforce the fact in terms of thinking, who are these stakeholders? Children, of course, are our most important stakeholders in the educational setting. And alongside them is all these support structures, be it teachers, be it head teachers, community members, parents. And each of these stakeholders also needs support from each other in order for social emotional learning, for a person to thrive, for inclusion to take place. For all of that knowledge and the wisdom that you have shared with all of us today, thank you a lot to all our panelists. And a big thank you to Madhu for bearing with us. I know we were a little fast at times, but you have continued. So thank you, Madhu, a lot. And thank you to all the audience who have asked such pertinent questions and shared your reflections as we went ahead. And looking forward to the rest of it. You have all started it off today very, very brilliantly. Thank you to all of you, and looking forward to hearing more from all of you.
And thank you, Seema, for moderating so well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for giving
Thank
us the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Very nice to meet
Thank you,
you.
everybody.